And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community, where we explore the issues and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for helping us grow. We recently hit 1,385 subscribers. Thank you so much, folks. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube for the new folks and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. To see our library of over 150 past episodes, you can go on my website at www.jasontramm.net. You can also see who we have coming up, and we have a really exciting roster of artists coming up in the next month and two, so make sure you check it out. They explore the classical music world, the opera world, contemporary music, independent songwriters, rock bands, you name it. There's great stories to tell of these wonderful artists. Here on Music Matters, we take you behind the curtain and explore the people behind the art. We have an incredible artist today, Donna Weng Friedman, a pianist, a collaborative coach, someone who is a gifted teacher at the Mannes School of Music, who has a new EP, Heritage and Harmony, Silver Linings, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And she's also, she's in collaboration with WQXR Radio. She is the created and produced Heritage and Harmony. So we're going to talk about that, her work with WQXR. She is an accomplished musician. She has collaborated with such superb artists as the St. Luke's Chamber Ensemble, Carter Bray, Anna Kavafian, David Schifrin, Kelly Hall Tompkins, who was a guest on the show, and many others. She is, we're delighted she can join us, and thank you so much. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight with you, Jason. I love your program.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, whenever I get to meet new artists who I haven't collaborated with directly, it's such a thrill. And to someone who's doing such incredible work, I'm delighted to have this conversation tonight.
Oh, thank you. And I think you're doing incredible work too. I've been watching this show throughout the pandemic, and it's one of the highlights. It really is wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's a labor of love and something we came up with. Basically, I was supposed to be making my conducting debut in Vienna and Prague, and I was so excited. I spent years setting up those collaborations. And then all of a sudden, it was all gone for all of us. All of our performances kind of stopped suddenly. And I said, well, I miss my colleagues. For the first month I told you I live in the suburbs, I spent gardening and working in the backyard, getting all the leaves cleaned up and cleaning up all the trees. And finally, about a month later that was done, I said, now I've got to do something creative. So jump back to the creative track, and I said, I miss having the conversations with my colleagues, and the show came out of that. So it's been a real blessing to get to speak to people like you about the great work they're doing.
Yeah. Another silver lining of the pandemic, right?
Time with our families certainly has been one blessing, and then finding new ways to be creative.
Right. And connect with new people. The world became smaller with the virtual world, the virtual programming. Of course, we all want and can't wait for in-person concerts to come back. That's a given. But I think the virtual programming is here to stay as well. I think that's one of the silver linings that many people who may not have had time or the inclination or or could afford classical music concerts. I think over the pandemic, with just a click of the mouse, they were introduced to a whole new world, and I'm hoping that they will come to our concerts.
Well, I think that we've reached people who've never been reached before, and that our job is going to be to make that translate to live performance.
That's right. Exactly.
So you were in the center of the pandemic, being in New York City. How did that affect you? I know everyone on the show, I've spoken about this. What's it like during COVID? And every single 150 people have had different reactions and processed it in a different way. Some have not performed and not done a lot of performance, and have done a lot of reading and introspection. I say that we've all become philosophers during COVID. How did you handle that?
It was one of the most interesting years, actually, and also one of the most productive and busy years. And it all stemmed from one incident in Central Park when I was walking my dog last March, when I was assaulted, for being Asian.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah, well, I wasn't physically hurt. It was a verbal assault. It was 1:00 in the afternoon, walking my dog, and this very large man comes, barreling towards me, and he starts screaming in my face every single nasty racial ethnic slur about Asians that he could think of. And then he ended it by saying, well, get out of this country, go back to where you came from, or get what you deserve.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And, there was a group of passers-by, and they didn't hear this. I don't know if they did or not, but they were walking towards us. So right at the moment when I thought he was going to maybe, hit me or something, they came and he ran into the park. And so I took my dog and I ran home. And this was in March, 2 weeks before sheltering in place started, right? But from that day on, I did not leave my apartment for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
You know,
And as you said, the words can be just as vicious as being assaulted physically. The words, that's just, and for someone who was born in New York City, we were just talking about you were born in Queens, and my parents were born in Queens, and I was born in New York. I mean, it's unreal. People treat people that way.
I have to say that I've led a very smooth sailing life, been very lucky. I've never felt discriminated against before. So this came as such a shock, such a shock. And it shook me up. But, I think what was worse was over the next couple of weeks, reading about so many hate crimes against the AAPI community. It was just unbearable after a while.
I saw a lot of my colleagues. I'm an orchestra conductor, so I've worked with so many people of the Asian community. Of course, we don't even think about that as musicians. We just collaborate with everyone. We collaborate with each other in so many different ways.
Music is colorblind.
Oh, and then when I work in the opera house, when you get up there and do the job well, that's like, it doesn't matter if you're purple or green or blue,
Right.
or it really doesn't matter. And I always find such great conversations with my colleagues, and I'm listening to these colleagues who I respect so much tell me some of their stories, and it's just hurts me, and it just makes me so sad.
Yeah. And, during this period of time, I actually stopped. My morning ritual was to have my coffee and read the paper. And I just stopped doing that. I couldn't do it anymore because it was so painful. All the bad news, everything that was going on. So I changed my routine to listening to music. But I started listening specifically to music written by underrepresented composers. So women composers, Asian American composers, African American composers. And, there is a wealth of music out there. I mean, really, it's a treasure trove. And so many people have not had the opportunity, to hear it. So this was really an interesting and a time of growth for me. Because even though I felt, that this incident was horrific towards me, and I, was shaken up by all of that. I also saw that as an opportunity for me to do something about it, and that's when I created Heritage and Harmony in collaboration with WQXR, because I felt like I wanted to have my colleagues, my Asian American, musician, composer colleagues, share their stories and their music. I think stories, our stories are so important to share. The more people know about each other, the more they realize we're not so different, and the more they respect and can feel, empathy and kindness. So WQXR, the studios were closed by then already. So they asked me to do a virtual video series. And that's what I did. And so that was my first project that, came about because of the pandemic, because of the incident and all the ongoing hate crimes against, Asian Americans. And that launched last May. And I, felt very good about that. I invited a lot of my, close colleagues, but from all over the country, because we were doing it virtually. So that was, wonderful experience to do that.
Well, it's great to see that, that's, we talk about the silver lining. We've had a whole year of silver linings, and being musicians, we have to be positive. I mean, we have to have a positive outlook. We've all become these philosophers, and thank you for sharing that, because out of that horrific experience, this is something beautiful that's budding out of it.
Well, I was very happy with that. And, after that, the entire year I've been very productive and doing a lot of virtual concerts and programs. But I have to say, Jason, my year started off with a bang and ended with a bang, because in December, my entire family got sick with COVID.
Oh.
How do you like that? But the good news is that we all, got through it, and it was something that I think, these experiences made me feel very grateful, very grateful for, my life up until all of this happened. And also the fact that we did get through it. And when you get through things like this together as a family and with your friends and your colleagues, you become stronger, and that's how I feel. I do believe that, this past year was a learning experience and also helped me become more connected with my own Asian American identity, with my own heritage. Because I felt so much more, I was really, really, really devastated, and I still am, by all these ongoing assaults against the Asian American community. And as you said, I can feel it, the hurt, the anger. A year later, nothing has changed. In fact, I just read that the hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country went up by 167%.
That's staggering and pathetic, really.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And what I've been reading about, the hate crimes have been targeting the most vulnerable of our community, the elderly, women, people who can't fight back, right?
I saw that horrific video. That was all over the news for a while. I mean, someone just like slamming an elderly lady walking to church. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, I don't know why people are demonizing people like that. It makes no sense at any level.
That's right. But I think there is hope, because I think that historically, I mean, this is not new, obviously. Bigotry against Asian Americans has been going on since the 19th century. But what I think is a little bit different, and I do feel that there is hope, is that I think the younger generation of Asian Americans is much more vocal, and also with the help of social media. Social media has made it much easier to communicate and to make a stand and for people to come together. So I see that with the AAPI community, and I'm very proud to be part of that. So these are all the silver linings, and the music, that has been my saving grace throughout this entire year.
I asked this: how can music help to start healing? How can music be a part of the healing process?
Oh, that's such a great question, and there's so many different levels. So let me answer first personally, right? Because during this past year, when I was listening to all this music, I would actually feel very connected. I listened to a lot of music, but there were 4 pieces specifically that spoke to me that I cannot even describe. And I believe that right before the show, you aired a performance of mine of Prelude by Beata Moon.
Stunning piece.
Right? Stunning piece. That piece, when I first heard it, I felt a connection to it in such a different way than I've ever felt before. It spoke to me, I think, as not just an Asian American woman, but almost it brought back to me almost like a childhood memory. There was an innocence about it, and there was a sense of peace and contentment towards the end. So I looked up the composer, and when I found out it was Beata Moon, it was pretty amazing because we went to Juilliard together. We studied with Adele Marcus.
Oh, it's a small world.
It's a small world. So I reached out to Beata to find out her story because the last I heard, she was a pianist at Juilliard, right? So she told me that, she grew up in a very traditional Korean American family in Indiana, where there are really not a lot of Asians there. So she kind of felt invisible. She was a very good Korean daughter. She studied hard. She played the piano, practiced, got to Juilliard. But it wasn't until years later, when she was an adult, and she actually took time off from piano and music. That's when she found her true calling, and that was as a composer. And this prelude was her very first piece written for piano solo.
Wow.
That's how she found her voice. And I felt it. When I heard it, there was some connection there. So that piece, it means a lot to me. And that is one of the pieces on Heritage and Harmony, Silver Linings. My album.
Music's all about storytelling. It's such an important part of music. And the more you know about the people who create that music, the more deeply your interpretations become.
Exactly.
So why don't we take a look at your story? Tell us your story. Did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
Okay, well, let me just tell you how it all began. I was 6 years old and my pet parakeet died.
Oh.
Green spot. Now, I was 6. I didn't take care of him. My brother, who is 9 years older than me, took care of Green Spot. But it was our first pet. So when Green Spot died, I was devastated. And I couldn't stop crying. And my mom, who was very superstitious, she said, "Oh, you have to stop crying. It's bad luck." Right? And I couldn't stop crying. It was just so devastating to me to lose, a pet. So my parents bought a piano, a little spinet piano. I remember it's Jansen. Now, it's funny because I'm not sure if it's related, but they don't make pianos anymore, but there is a Jansen swimsuit company. So,
They got out of the piano business.
Yeah. Anyway, they bought this piano, and my brother started taking lessons. He's much older than me. And he didn't take to it. He didn't take to it that well. It wasn't his thing. So they started me on lessons, and I loved it. I stopped crying, and I just got into the playing the piano. And it was my first teacher, Mrs. Beck, who is a neighborhood teacher who came to the house, and she taught me my first real repertoire for piano. And that piece was First Lost by Robert Schumann. And it's from the album of the Young. And when I played that piece, and when I performed it in a student recital, I felt my loss from my pet in a way that I couldn't even describe. And I communicated that in my performance through my music. Now, Jason, I was a very shy little girl growing up. I didn't speak much, very quiet, but I found a new way to communicate through music. A year later, I was at the Juilliard Pre-College, and I studied at Juilliard Pre-College for 10 years. And I had the most incredible experience of my life, studying with wonderful teachers and meeting all these incredible, young, talented kids. We all, had so much in common. So I really found joy in performance. I felt more comfortable on stage than anywhere else. I really did. So I started doing competitions and performing professionally at quite a young age. And then in high school, I was the first winner of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra competition. And I had to do, and it was, I performed with Maestro Henry Lewis.
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah, and it was an incredible experience. Governor Brendan Byrne invited me to his mansion as part of, to honor me as being, because at that point we had already moved to New Jersey. So now I was an honorary New Jersey artist there. But I went to Juilliard for 10 years and I wanted to learn more outside of music. I felt like if I could broaden my horizons and learn more about literature, history, the world, that would also add to my, musicality and understanding and performance. So I think I surprised a lot of people at Juilliard, including my teacher, when I chose to go to Princeton instead of Juilliard. And I went to Princeton, and those were the 4 greatest years because I learned so much, not just from the incredible professors, but from my colleagues. But something interesting happened, and I kind of pivoted a little bit, and I was interested in working in artist management when I graduated. I got my first job at International Creative Management. Do you remember ICM back in the day? It was one of the
Sure.
top artist management agencies. But they didn't have room for me in the classical music department, so they put me in the rock and roll department
That's fascinating.
on the 18th floor. I remember that, and I love rock. I love all music. I love
Me
all.
too.
And for 7 or 8 months, I was doing, you know, I was the assistant agent, so I was the new kid on the block. So I got to do all the dirty work. I had to do all the writers for all the artists. I had to cover some of the really late shows in CD clubs. But I also got to take all my friends to Studio 54, Limelight, and saw
Whoa.
Tina Turner, David Bowie at the Garden. I mean, it was something. But by the end of those 7, 8 months, I was starving to play again. And, so I ran back to Juilliard for my master's, studied with Adele Marcus, which was another experience. And we actually did get along very, very well after our initial face-off. You want to hear about my first lesson with Adele Marcus?
Absolutely.
Okay. I had just won the Gina Bachauer International Competition at Juilliard. So at that time, I walked into my first lesson and I brought her Brahms Opus 118. And big mistake because that's a big piece. And for your first lesson with someone like Adele Marcus, that took a lot of guts and a little stupidity. So I started playing for her and I started hearing, these sounds. She was making,
Oh no. Oh no.
and then I kept playing. And then all of a sudden she screamed, "Stop!" And I stopped and I froze. And then she takes my music, she throws it on the ground, and she spits on it.
Oh no.
And she says, "This is what I think of your Brahms, dear." So I think at that point, she waited for me to burst into tears. I really think so. But something, I don't know what it was, something stopped me from crying. And I looked at her very calmly and I said, "Miss Marcus, I came to Juilliard to study with you because I really want to learn from you. But if you don't think you can teach me in a respectful way, then I think I will need to change studios and study with someone else." Now,
Good for you.
as I said, I had just won the Gina Bachauer, and all the teachers wanted me in their studio. So it didn't take her very long before she said, "Oh dear, please, we're going to get along fine." And from that moment, we got along great. She put me, I was the last student every Monday for those 2 years. So after my lessons were 2 or 3 hours long, and she would sit down and play for me. And this woman could play. She had such a sound, her tone. I've never heard playing like that. But she couldn't perform on stage because she had, real stage fright. I don't know if you read about
No,
the,
I didn't.
the concert where she, at the Schumann piano concerto, right before she started playing, she vomited all over the keys.
Oh,
Yeah. They changed pianos and she ended up playing brilliantly. But that was, she had major stage fright, which is what's kept her from becoming one of the greatest pianists of all time. But she could play. So my lessons would be many hours long where she would end up playing, and then we would go out to Sweetwater's for dinner. She would take me out for dinner. So it was great. But, I was proud of myself for standing up to her in a respectful way.
These great teachers always have something special to teach, and it's but you have to stand up for yourself. You have to believe in yourself and know that you've got something that you want to say, and and I think that she respected you because of that.
Yeah, I think so.
Initially.
Yes. But that's a lesson I'll never forget.
I have to ask, you have such an interesting, I always love people's paths, and you have such an interesting path. But not, you look at some of the great conductors, and like you look at Bernstein went to Harvard, and Harvard's got a lot of great artists go through there, and Princeton as well is a wonderful music program. There are several great musicians who've gone to Princeton, and how did that different path, how did that enrich your life?
Oh my goodness. I think my entire career has been very different from many of my colleagues who went to Juilliard. There's just no question. It's not that I can't focus on performing, and not that I'm not committed. I love performing. I love being on stage, but I'm interested also in creating. I'm not a composer. Never have been. Never will be. I'm just not good at that. But I create in other ways, and everything about music speaks to me. I'll tell you, I'll be walking on the street and I'll hear music. I'll be standing at a bus stop and I'll start crying because I hear a passage from, the Chopin, concerto that kills me, right? So I've been very lucky to have many different opportunities. I've been music supervisor for film documentaries, Frames of Life, produced and directed by Mary Engel, about her mother, Ruth Orkin, the incredible photographer, whose photographs you can see right behind me. There's Einstein, Bernstein, Rubinstein, But Ruth Orkin's most famous photograph is the American Girl in Italy. You must have seen.
Of course.
Yeah. So the film documentary, we went to Sundance and we won honorable mention, and I did 2 other film documentaries, all classical music, because I want people to hear classical music, and it works so beautifully. So Frames of Life has been on, I think, HBO. It's been playing quite a bit and won several awards. So that was one very interesting experience. And then there was a time in the 2000s, I forget when it was exactly, when New York City, because I've been living in New York for a long time and I have 2 children, and when New York City cut back in the arts in public schools. You remember that?
I do. I was growing up in that time, I think, or I was maybe I was in high school when it was ferociously cut.
Yep, ferociously cut. And I didn't like that one bit. So I created, that was, an interesting time because it was the beginning of the app, right? App started, it was a brand new frontier. So I took some time while I was, I stopped performing. Again, I stopped performing so many times, but when my kids were little, I didn't tour. I didn't want to do that anymore because I wanted to be home, which is why I did the film, the music for the film documentaries. And now I started learning about app development, and I developed my own interactive children's classical music apps. And
amazing how seamlessly you've transitioned to so many really amazing projects. I mean,
all about storytelling,
app developer and film, working with film, and of course, you've achieved as a soloist. You've achieved as an ensemble, as a chamber music artist. You just seem to be able to weave. I think your intellectual curiosity is so obvious that you just love a lot of things and you do them really well.
but it's all about music and stories. You know, my interactive app is teaching children how to listen for the inherent storyline in classical music. So I wrote stories to go for, go with classical music pieces that were short and sweet and very, popular. Flight of the Bumblebee, The Swan, and of course my wonderful colleagues and friends, Elizabeth Mann, flutist, Carter Bray, cellist, principal cellist of the New York Philharmonic. They joined me on this project. My producer was 19 Grammy Award winner David Frost. They're beautiful, beautiful. They're works of art, these apps.
I bet each of those artists love performing to the kids are going to get. We have to get kids involved in classical music, or there won't be classical music.
Well, one of my favorite experiences was bringing these apps. Back then, I didn't know anything about fundraising. I didn't know anything about grants. I was doing everything on my own, right? Which is why I had to stop doing them after a while, because it was very costly and I couldn't afford it anymore. But I would take my apps into the inner city schools, into charter schools, and I would do group workshops with these kids. And the way they responded, oh my God, that was the greatest gift. That repaid me for everything, all the hours, all the money, everything I put into it was repaid, 100-fold, because they loved it. And they said, how come we never heard this music before? Oh my God.
Isn't that heartbreaking? It's just heartbreaking.
It is.
I'm a teacher. I've always been a teacher. I was a middle school teacher for a year. I was a high school teacher for 5 years before starting my doctorate and doing my master's degree and doctorate, and then leaving. And now I teach at a college. So I've always been a teacher as well as a conductor. And some of my formative experiences, when I was chorus master of the New Jersey State Opera, I did a trovatore for 2,500 inner city students in Newark. And I was so nervous because I wasn't cut up, but I was just nervous to see how they respond. And it was like it was like a 90-minute performance of trovatore. It was rapt applause. These people, and many of them have never seen or heard of an opera. So, it's amazing. Sports and music are a way for a lot of people to get out of very tough situations. And when you take that away from people, it's really a devastating thing to me. And, and more than just people who do it for a career like you and I, but for people to learn how to get their emotions out. Classical music is the way, and when you learn to connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So how do you like, what are you working on now? You seem like a person like a lot like me, like always working on 10 projects.
Always working on them. So, I just released my pandemic EP, I call it, right? And that's
So tell us about how you found the composers. How do you discover? Now, I love in your bio it talks about you curating. Yeah, you are curating all these different artists and putting them together into projects. And isn't that, to me, that's like, I love programming. Programming is my favorite time of the year when I'm sitting dreaming.
Yeah, it's a wonderful feeling. And so this album, Heritage and Harmony, Silver Linings, I never planned on it. See, it was the music that created the album, So as I mentioned about the Prelude by Beata Moon, that started, my journey, I would say, healing from that incident in the park a year ago. And then I came across another gorgeous piece by Cambodian American composer Chinnery Ung. And Chinnery Ung is being inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters this May.
Wow.
Award-winning composer, extraordinary composer. And this piece that I discovered on one of those mornings, it grabbed me because it had a jazzy feel to it.
Cool.
I have always wanted to play jazz, and I never could because I never felt free enough. The improvisation stuff, that you have to kind of, really let go, right? And I let go when I perform classical music, but that's different. So when I came across this piece, I said, oh, wow, it's got like these little jazz kind of thing. I could do this. I want to do this. But it also had kind of an impressionistic sound. It was just so interesting. And the title is magical. Space Between the Fish and the Moon.
Ooh.
Now, I reached out to Chinnery Ung because we're living in this incredible world of social media. And he was so gracious. We had lovely conversations. And I asked him about this title. And he told me that it's based on a poem by the 13th century poet. It's a mystic poet, Rumi.
Ah.
Have you heard of Rumi?
Absolutely. I've read a lot of his, a lot of great quotes and
That's right.
great philosophy. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where that whole mystical vibe comes. And Chinnery Ung, his story is unbelievable. So, he came to this country in the 1960s to study clarinet at the Manhattan School of Music School, right? And he was supposed to go back to Cambodia, but as luck would have it, he won a scholarship to study at Columbia. And that was such a huge turning point, because had he gone back to Cambodia instead of staying in this country, he would have met the Cambodian genocide, where he lost a lot of his family members. 2 million people were killed. So it was like fate that he, was able to stay in this country to study and not, yeah, that's pretty intense, right?
Profound. And sometimes fate keeps you where you're supposed to be. And wow.
Yeah. But so this piece, Space Between the Fish and the Moon, is part of a larger set of pieces called Seven Mirrors. Incredible. So now that's my next project, is to learn as many of these pieces as possible. And, through the pandemic, I've gotten to know Chinnery. So I consider him to be a friend and a mentor. And, when I first started playing this piece, when he first heard it, that same piece was on Heritage and Harmony with WQXR, right? And he said, make it your own. I give it to you. It's your piece. Well, my performance on the album, Heritage and Harmony, Silver Linings, is very different from the other one. And I'll tell you, it is all about my personal journey and transformation during those 8 months of the pandemic and becoming more connected to my Asian American roots.
How uniquely American. We can take a Cambodian citizen studying here, learning a composer, seen through the eyes of an American-born, a person of Asian descent, right? And writing about the poetry of a Sufi mystic, and it all comes together. That's such, to me, is like, it's just a wonderful mixture of everything that's great about music and culture.
It really is. It really is.
And the storytelling is so powerful because it's multi-layered and so fascinating.
It really is. And then when you know more about, as you said, the composers, then you can actually listen again to the music and find different, meanings and, layers and layers of understanding. So
with Beethoven, we have to have a seance, and we have to study for years and guess. But when the composers are living with social media, we can go right on the Facebook and say, "Hey, on bar 14, what were you thinking?"
What were you?
And you don't have to have a seance. It's nice.
That's right.
I find the same thing when I work with living composers. It's just I can reach out. I know we're all so closely aligned. Within if we go on Facebook and type in their name, we're going to say, "Oh, we have 15 million mutual friends," and
yeah,
it's easy to get in touch with people.
Yeah. No, I love working on music by contemporary living composers, because then you really can find out what I do is I with Chinnery, he was so gracious. I sent him the audio file of my first performance, WQXR, and then I sent him the second one, and he was just so gracious, and he was so complimentary, and he was just, he was so generous. I really enjoyed that whole experience. And
is he based in New York?
Excuse me? No, he's in California.
California, L.A. or where part of California?
I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure.
We'll look him up. Yeah. I'm really curious. I always love to find new composers. It just fascinates me.
Oh, he's amazing. So yeah, so that piece is also on this album. It's only 4 pieces. It's an EP. And then the other 2 pieces I discovered, they're not knew it all. But for me, I found this gorgeous, gorgeous art song by Florence Price.
Mm.
Now, this was for, the 19th Amendment centennial was last summer. And as you know, I am the co-creator and co-host of Her Music, Her Story with Allison Charney, who I know you know her, the soprano, wonderful, wonderful soprano.
Allison's been on the show, and we've worked together as conductor and soprano a few times. She's wonderful.
Yeah, so we have, our series. It's a mini series on WQXR as well, and the show shines a spotlight on women composers, past and present. We share their stories as well as their music. So we're always listening and looking for women composers. And Florence Price, my goodness, her music is so astounding. She was the first African American woman composer to have a major work performed by a major symphony orchestra. And you would think that having something like that happen to you in life would put you on the map, right?
Takes time sometimes.
Well, especially if you're Black and you're a woman.
In that time period, especially. Yep.
Yep. So she wrote to, there's a story that she wrote to Maestro Sergei Koussevitzky, who at that time was the conductor for Boston Symphony Orchestra. And she wrote him this beautiful letter, very heartfelt, saying, I'm writing to you, coming to you with two strikes against me. One, I'm a woman, and two, I'm African American. But I implore you to listen to my music and judge it by merit only. She never heard back from him. So, she had, concerts, and she did gain some, attention during her lifetime, but it really wasn't until recently, decades after her death, that they found like 20 boxes of her music in an abandoned house on the outskirts of Chicago. A treasure trove. I think her fourth symphony was part of that too. So now
That's right. I heard about that from Indira when she was on the show here, and fascinating music.
It's fascinating. So so there is a resurgence of her music, but I came across this art song, Night, by Florence Price. And then, for those of you who don't know what an art song is, it's a very specific genre of vocal music, written for solo voice and piano, a very intimate pairing. And the music is always set to a poem. And the poem for Night was written by Louise C. Wallace. Not much is known about her, except for the fact that she was an African-American teacher who won first place in an amateur poetry contest. And there is some speculation that she and Florence Price lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, around the same time. And at that time, Florence Price was a music teacher, and Louise C. Wallace was a housekeeper. But whether or not that's when their paths crossed, this song is so exquisite. So I fell in love with this song, and I am working on, as you know, I'm always working on something. I'm working on 2 education programs that will, in collaboration with the National Women's History Museum, and hopefully this will launch next spring. And so I wanted this song to be part of this, program of role models, and so sorry about that.
It's Florence Price saying thank you for promoting my music.
That's right. So I reached out to Indira Mahajan, right? The soprano.
Shout out to a dear friend, Indira Mahajan, a wonderful soprano.
Yep. And she and I worked on a virtual project together for the 19th Amendment Centennial with Allison Charney. And so I asked her, I said, would you like to record Night with me? And she hadn't heard of it either. As soon as she heard it, she goes, oh my God, it's just a no-brainer. And then separately, we both thought of another song. And that was the spiritual. He's got the whole world in his hands, and the arrangement by Margaret Bonds, another incredible African American woman composer. So I said, "Oh, these two songs, that's just incredible." So basically, all of this came together in November. Indira and I had never met before, right? Um, and we said, let's just do this. Let's make this recording, and that's basically how this album came to be. These four songs, the four pieces, the prelude, the space between the fish and the moon, night, and he's got the whole world in his hands. Four incredibly special pieces. So we went to the opera center and we recorded it. We actually didn't rehearse. Now,
Really?
yeah. So the two solo pieces, of course, that's for
Yeah.
that's mine. But with Indira and me, we never had a rehearsal before that. So we got together. The first thing we did was night. The first piece we played together. And mind you, this is the first time either one of us had collaborated with anybody else in those 9, 10 months of pandemic. This is the first time face to face. I've done so many virtual concerts, right? Where, I have my earpiece, I record, the other person records, we go back and forth, put it together. But this is the first time in person.
What did it feel like to get up there and make music for the first time?
I was wearing my mask. We were, kind of socially distant. It was heaven on earth. It was, first of all, you have to know it's the first time I played on a piano that was tuned and didn't have broken strings. My piano, my baby, has 3 broken strings because I didn't want anyone to come in and fix it. So sitting down and playing my solo pieces, it was like, oh my God, so that's how they sound.
Oh,
Right? So the entire experience was so uplifting. We were so inspired, but we also didn't want to spend too much time there because, socially distanced, we wanted to be very careful. Health and safety came first. So that was an extraordinary experience. And it was really my whole journey from, last March until that November recording that, led to this. So to this album.
incredible. What a journey. And what has this COVID period taught you about yourself?
Well, I do think that I'm more resilient than I gave myself credit for. I know that I'm an optimist because
You're a true New Yorker.
I am a New Yorker. I am, and I always will be a New Yorker. And I look forward to the day that New York is back on its feet and the arts are flourishing again. And I also realize how grateful I am to have my family, my friends, my colleagues, and my music. And, to share my music, even though, this has been such a tough year, to be able to share it virtually and through this album has meant so much to me. But then the other part of it was I also learned that it's so much better doing things together with other people. So the album was a labor of love, but in the end, the reason why it became Silver Linings was because of all the ongoing continued hate crimes against the Asian American community. And I wanted to shine a light on the fact that, first of all, this should not continue. And also that every little bit counts. Whatever we can do together to make our lives and the world a better place, we should do it. So all the proceeds for this album will go to this wonderful organization, the Korean American Community Foundation. I'm not Korean, I'm Chinese. This is an organization that started off very small years and years ago to support the Korean community, but They've grown so much, and the work they do to support not even just the Asian American community, but all, you know, all communities. They stand against racism at every level. And through the year, I've attended their webinars online, of course, and they have done so much incredible education work, because I do think the bottom line is education. We all need to learn to work together and live together.
You know, when people learn and they meet people of other cultures, we realize that the conversation becomes so much more rich when we hear more voices. I mean, that's what makes music so special, is the more voices that come and speak and the more voices that we learn from. This disappears with education.
Exactly. So that's basically the whole journey of this album, from the music to the collaborations, and then finally to, to having this partnership with this incredible, philanthropic organization. They raise money, and they it goes directly to small businesses that are not doing well during the pandemic. It's pretty extraordinary. So I know, as a musician, I can't do that much, but I think partnering with other people and organizations.
Well, you're doing incredible work, and it's such important work. How can people find out more about you, and where can they go to hear this album?
It's on Spotify, Amazon, a whole other things. But if you go to Spotify and Amazon, you can't miss it.
That's pretty much where everyone goes these days.
Heritage and Harmony, Silver Linings. And, my hope is that people will listen to each track on the album and enjoy the gorgeous music by composers they've never heard about before, while knowing that they're also supporting the AAPI community.
Such important work. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. And when did you have any live performances coming up, or when can people see you next, or when will you next be on QXR? Where can people go to find out more about you?
I've been so bad, I don't have a website.
I found you on your Manus, where you teach at Manus Conservatory.
Yes.
I found you there.
You could definitely find me on the Manus.
And it's up to date, too.
Yes, it pretty much is up to date. And I think WQXR is going to be featuring part of my album also towards the end of May, as in celebration for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So, but
what projects do you have on the back burner that you may be contemplating before they come to life? I'd love to hear what's happening before it does.
Well, the two education programs that I'm working on are very important to me, because I feel that our girls of color in school, they need role models. I think that the role models, if for in the arts especially, they need to see their faces in these incredible musicians. So that is one of the projects, is a role model, spotlighting, featuring female role models of Asian descent, of African American descent, of women of color, sharing their stories and their music. And then the other project is something that's quite unique, I think, and that is with, as I mentioned to you, that Prelude by Beata Moon really struck a very, very, struck a chord with me. It's something that I love that piece so much. So that's the center of this Poetry to Music project, where I've invited several leading women poets of color. It's a commissioning project, so that they will commission a piece that goes with the prelude. And in that way, of course, I'm collaborating with the National Women's History Museum, but WNET PBS Children's Lab will be creating the teaching material for this program, so that children, girls of color in particular, it's dedicated to girls of color, but so that children can learn how to write poetry. And the music will be the roadmap for it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How special.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we can find something. I would love to talk to you offline about finding some of these programs with orchestra. You and me
I would love to do
putting
that.
some project. I just love what you're doing, and continued success in all your projects, and continued work in this such an important time to be doing the work you're doing. And I'm so glad we got to meet today.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's been such a pleasure. And let's do talk. Let's do talk. I would love to do something.
I find that when creative people get together, magic happens.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Continued success.
Continue, Jason.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and share our videos. Helps our community grow. Our next show will be Saturday. We've got a singer-songwriter, independent singer-songwriter named Mary Loffelbein from Oregon, and she'll be joining us. And on Monday, we have a very special show. We have Metropolitan Opera diva Jennifer Rowley is going to join us, and you won't want to miss that. Thank you so much, and remember, keep music alive.